Hey yo, welcome to the Godcast.
I hope you all are buckled up, because things are about to get weird.
I don't understand why you chose me.
You want to change the world, son. So do I.
Where are we at in terms of history on the timeline? Where are we exactly? I'm just trying to uncover the truth and bring forth what I can see as the truth. The Bible seemed to be predicting more things than any other conspiracy theory type information, Look, one thing's for certain, that there is so much power in the name of Jesus Christ. That I know for sure.
Welcome to Godcast.
Welcome to Godcast.
The Goodness Over Darkness.
The Goodness Over Darkness podcast.
Here is your host.
Here's your host, Emmanuel Kingman.
Emmanuel Kingman.
Welcome to the light.
Welcome to the light.
Welcome to the light.
It's showtime. What is going on, everybody? Welcome to Godcast, the Goodness Over Darkness podcast. I'm your host, Emmanuel Kingman, and with me is the turkey gobbler herself, Mimi.
Oh, thanks.
Oh, it's a Thanksgiving Day joke. Yesterday was Thanksgiving. Hello, my love. How are you?
That's fine.
Yes, today is Black Friday, as they call it in the Western world.
Yeah, Black Friday. Buy a dishwasher today, get it in 2 months.
Yes. That was a dilemma for us today, getting our dishwasher just broke during the last
Oyster
weekend.
roast on my birthday. Broke on my birthday.
Yeah, I think it was the next day, but either way, it's that weekend, the weekend before Thanksgiving. So
definitely was broken on the day of the oyster roast. I had to wash a lot of those dishes.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yes, yes, that is right. Yeah. So anyway,
Thanks, COVID.
Yeah. Anyway, our special guest today was Ken Ammi. And Ken is a self-publisher and author, and he has a website. Yes, lots and lots of books, over 50. He has a website, truefreethinker.com.
Yes.
He is a very studied guy on the Bible, not just the Bible, but many different phases. But he knows the Bible very, very well. He's a Messianic Jew, which gave me, just going from there, I knew he would have, I knew he'd have a wealth of information on some things that I haven't been able to have answered by people yet. Maybe I didn't ask the people,
right questions.
Right. But I geared up for this one to ask him about Jesus and the teachings of Jesus and the quote unquote false messiahs that share characteristics with Jesus before Jesus came. So he was able to answer some of those types of questions. Mithras and Buddha and Osiris we talked about. So you guys, if you think that it's the same story being told over and over and Jesus is just another one of these, well, Ken's got some news for you. You'll want to stay tuned to this episode to find out why they are not, in fact, the same story being told over and over. But this was a very, very fun episode. We talked about transhumanism.
Yeah, I like how you guys did that whole full circle thing from the black goo to the, to resurrection and
we did transhumanism, graphene oxide, the abyss, the demons. He had a very interesting take. Yes, yeah, and he had a very interesting take on demons that I've never heard before. You'll have to listen to it to find out, but it's not what I've ever heard before. I don't know if it's true or not. I've never thought of it in that sense, so I'll have to do some thinking about that. Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff in here. I don't want to give away everything in the intro, but there's a lot of different interesting things in here. What else do you have written down over there? That
just stuff that I want to look into, and a couple of his book names that he had rattled off. I wanted to look them up.
Yeah, he gave us a lot to think about. because he's very exact with his information, that he wants to make sure that there's not just one source but multiple sources, if he can find multiple sources, and anything that contradicts something he wants to really break down and have the correct information. So just a lot of interesting stuff in here, a lot of fun conversation to be listened to by people, and learn a lot about Jesus. We spent about 40 minutes or so, actually, maybe 30, something like that, just talking about Jesus and how the resurrection, did he resurrect in a physical body? Where did he go? How long was he here? Why wasn't this considered the second coming? These are all questions I asked him, and he answered it. I'd say I liked his answers. Yeah, very good answers for me. Yeah. So there's a lot of stuff like that in here. So if you guys, I know a lot of people have been asking me about Jesus himself. You're going to really like this episode. You're really going to get a lot out of it. If you have questions about the man, and
the man, the myth, the legend.
Yeah, the man, the myth, the legend, Jesus Christ. So I think that's all for this intro, unless you had something you wanted to get into.
No.
All right. So yeah, stay tuned. This one is a really fun one. You can find Ken, his website, truefreethinker.com. Oh, well, you know what? I do want to say that we have the roundtables. I have 2 roundtables. The December 7th, my birthday, entering Christ's kingdom. I think that might actually happen before this episode comes out, as well as the one on December 11th, which is called Breaking Out of the Box. I just finished making all the advertisements for both of those today, so you guys can check out my Instagram.
So I gotta get ready to be on camera.
Yeah, at least for my birthday episode.
At least.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I advertised that you're going to be on it. You said yes to it. So
find me a stool.
Yeah, we'll
so
get
this
you a
midget
stool.
can be on camera.
Maybe we'll get another camera. I don't even know how I'd set that up, but we'd find a way.
Another camera.
Okay. So anyway, we have those 2 roundtables, and you guys will not want to miss them. They'll be separate, but they'll both be a good time. And check out
second birthday here.
Yes. Yeah, my Facebook and the Instagram both have the advertisements on. I worked pretty hard on them, so if you guys go check them out, share it around.
He did work extra hard on them.
Yeah, I was actually having a phone conversation with a
Extra.
friend when I was working on one of them. Yeah, it was fun. I like doing it. I like bettering myself, as Ken and I talked about at the very end of the episode. Like, how can I be better tomorrow than I was today? What can I do better? How can I better myself? That's what I like doing.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's what I do. Anytime I'm doing something and I find out a better way to do it, then I do it the better way. That's me. I'm very fluid, right?
Practice.
Yep. I started switching around coconut oil in my mouth, and Mimi laughed at me because I try bettering myself in
I didn't
every
laugh.
Well, you did.
Like, all right,
You exactly
I did kind of
laughed.
snickered because
You
I did
didn't
this
kind
too
of snicker.
before.
You cracked up and you
I
said,
did,
"Oh, I
you
love that
know.
you do this because you're always so
Well, I like
fluid."
that he attempts to add all these different. He has a routine, and then slowly, like, one thing will get added, and then another thing will get added, and then his routine is like 3 hours.
It is not 3 hours.
Well, it's not yet.
It's never.
We're still picking
I
stuff to
never
add.
add things. No. This is a false representation of
How
the
long
truth.
are we? All right. How long are you going to do the coconut thing for?
I don't know. As long as I'm going to do it.
Okay, so it's now part of the routine.
It's not part of a routine, though. It's just I'm going to do it daily.
Acts like I'm lying. Not lying.
Okay, I haven't added anything else. You're
What are
acting.
you getting so upset about? Okay.
I meditate and I do a language every day. That's all I do. And I look at Bible verse every morning.
Okay.
They're the 3 things that I've been doing consistently every day since way before I moved here. So I don't add things all the time. I just try to better myself. And if there's new, better way. Like, okay, I drink zeolite, but that's not part of a routine. It doesn't take up extra time. It's just I drink zeolite to get the transhumanism out of me. You know, that's why I do it, because it works. It does work. And I suggest everybody else out there start looking into it. Look into how you can remove metals from your body. And if swishing around coconut oil in your mouth, as Matthew Lehman told us the other day,
Does get rid of bacteria
yeah,
and things.
gets rid of bacteria. And if it can help you heal cavities too, why not? I'm down to restore myself. And if it's something safe and something that has merit to it, I'll give it a go.
Right. You have to have your own experience.
Exactly. So make sure you check out my website, emmanuelkingman.com, and hit me up if you guys are interested in any energy work or getting in touch with me for any reason. I like people just sending me questions, just getting in touch with me to say that they like the show, whatever. I love interacting with everybody, so you can hit me up, email, any of my social media accounts. I want to thank you all for listening. Okay, that's something we can do. Yesterday was Thanksgiving, even though this will come out way after Thanksgiving. And on Thanksgiving, I had my roundtable of healing and giving thanks came out that day. So that was a very timely thing. It just lined up that way for me. I want to give thanks to God for putting me in this position that I'm in at this time. There's no way I would have known just last year that I'd be in the spot that I'm in now, and I would be so grounded in the truth of Jesus Christ that I am, because that's not how it was last year. And that's not, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, and so on and so forth. I couldn't imagine where I would be right now. And the peace that I have in my life, and the chaos that isn't here, even when I don't have a good day, even when I don't have things go my way. I'm not some raging psychopath or some blubbering fool. I am stable constantly. And in order to get that, I had to give up myself and start doing the work of God. Do thy will of God. God's will became my will, or rather my will became God's will. And God gave me back my discernment. I didn't have discernment for a while, and then I linked up with Jesus, and then boom, God gave me the power of discernment. So there you have it. What are you thankful for, Mimi?
Everything in my life.
It is a just general answer, but I understand exactly what you mean, is that it's all changed so much, and I can relate to what you're saying, and I'm sure many people out there can. There's not just one thing we can put a finger on and point to. There's so much. So thank you, God. We love you very, very much, Jesus Christ. I guess that'll do it for the intro. Make sure you stay tuned at the end of the episode for a preview of the next episode. And without further ado, here is Ken Ammi. Hello, everybody. On today's episode, I have on a guest who is a converted Messianic Jew. He is an author, researcher, and self-publisher. He has written over 50 books and dives deep into many biblical topics. He is creator of the website truefreethinker.com. Everybody welcome Ken Ammi to the show.
Oh, thank you. That's just too much.
Welcome to the show, Ken. How are you, my friend?
Good. Thanks for having me, and I appreciate you and your audience hearing me out.
Yeah, thank you for coming on the show. I heard you on Tinfoil Hats, very interesting. And then you contacted me the next day, actually, which was, a bit of a synchronicity.
There you go.
So, all these things just kind of line up. When you're supposed to talk to somebody, you talk to them. So how are you?
Great. Thank you much.
All right. So why don't you tell my audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, well, I'm going to start with something you said. I'm going to pick on you. You said I was converted, but I don't see it that way at all. In fact,
Okay.
So the background is that I am a Jew by birth, and I would say even by theology. Now that's going to ruffle the feathers of Rabbinic Jews. Okay, Rabbinic Judaism is very different, right? That's not the Old Testament Judaism. That's a Judaism that came about almost, I would say, by necessity, but that's a huge topic. Anyhow, so Rabbinic Judaism would be the majority of Jews on the planet today who adhere to a system of rabbis, the rabbinate, and they're the authoritative ones. So then, as a Jew, coming to accept that Jesus is the Messiah was not a conversion. It was just, that's what a Jew is supposed to do, accept the Jewish Messiah. In fact, that's one thing I told my dad once when he first asked me that's exactly what he asked me, what are you going to convert? And I said, convert? There's nothing to convert to. I'm a Jew who believes the Jewish Messiah has come in the person of the Jewish man, Jesus, as prophesied in the Jewish scriptures. So what is there for me to convert to? I'm just accepting that that's the true Judaism, the actual biblical Judaism, the natural outworking of Judaism.
Oh, well, my apologies. I didn't.
No, not at all. It's just, that's a very just sort of common sense thing to say.
Well, that's an interesting take that you have, because a lot of Jews, they think that Jesus or the Messiah was supposed to end Roman rule. So to my knowledge anyway. So it's interesting that you feel that Jesus is the Messiah. So you are very studied in the Bible, obviously. So like, how did you come to realize that? Was this a rabbi that was teaching you this specifically, or was it your own conclusions you came to?
So just to take one quick step back, you see the Talmud Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud, it talks about how the Messiah should have already come. And I mean, that was being written, I don't know, 300 to 500 AD. They're saying, no, the Messiah should have already come. But since he failed to show up, now it's all about good works. So even in the most authoritative text of Rabbinic Judaism, they're admitting openly the Messiah should have already come. All expectations were met, but he just didn't show up.
So this is after Krishna, Buddha, Dionysius.
Oh yeah, well
Mithras.
After all of them, well after Jesus as well.
Okay.
So they're saying he should have come and didn't. So then it turned into a religion about good works, obviously, because you don't see Rabbinic Jews sacrificing animals at a temple, right? Just by definition, it's a very different religion. So then for me, it was, I attended private Jewish school, and the only thing I ever heard about Jesus was while I was in Israel. I always joke that I was only in Israel one time, but I was there for 2 months. So I guess that counts like 5-10 trips worth, you know.
That's a good amount of time, yeah.
Yeah, and I was doing some studying over there. And that's the only time I was told anything about Jesus by Jews. And the statement was everything Jesus taught was Jewish except turn the other cheek. And yeah, everything Jesus did say was Jewish, even turn the other cheek. That wasn't like a new thing. So even that was inaccurate. But all that to say that my interest in the question of who Jesus was just came about from my many years of just searching for the truth and considering what various religions had to say, various philosophies, various worldviews, and ultimately recognizing that, hey, all this time I think I'm being so open-minded, but I realized I haven't given those Christian people a fair hearing. Right? I mean, if you go along with the culture, Christians are basically just politically correct punching bags. Yeah. You can say anything and do anything against them, and it's perfectly acceptable. Try that with anybody else, and you'll get canceled essentially. But so then I started, giving them a fair hearing and went through the stages of shock. throughout at least an entire year of serious consideration, from anger and denial to like eventual acceptance. So at first I was like, these Christians are nuts. Because let me just point out that the first time I met a person I knew, I could say, okay, I know for a fact this person is a Christian. I was 21 or 22. I knew nothing about Christian, nothing about the church, nothing about Christianity, nothing whatsoever, except the bits and pieces I picked up from the media and pop culture at large, which paints a horrible picture. But I didn't grow up around Christians or churchgoers or anything like that whatsoever, period. So to me, that was like just a new thing.
Where did you grow up, if you don't mind asking?
Did you ask where?
Yeah.
Well, I'm Argentinian, and then we moved to the States. And then that meeting, the first Christian was when I was about 21, 22. And then I came to accept Jesus when I was like 27.
Okay.
So, you know, a good few decades behind me of experience in thinking through these things and experiencing life before I came to that determination. And it was part of it. Okay, so obviously this is a multifaceted thing. It was intellectual, it was emotional, it was spiritual, it had just tons of stuff involved. Part of it was that I was reading one book in particular that always stands out to me, called The Search for Messiah by Chuck Smith and Mark Eastman. And it wasn't really so much what they had to say in the book, but that they quoted many, many, many different rabbinic writings. Okay, so the Targumim, the Midrashim, the Talmudim, you name it, they were quoting it. And I was like, okay, I can see the quotations, I can see the citations, but it can't be. It can't be. Because more so than not, they were siding with the Christian view. And I was like, that's just impossible. So thank God that there was at the local university, there's a library that specializes in religious material. So I was, and this is before books were readily available on the interweb machines, you know. So I went in there and I would pore over these rabbinic texts, looking everything up. And sure enough, it was just to the point that eventually I wrote a book called Is Jesus the Messiah? A Judaism versus Judaism Debate. Because I was thinking, well, if so many of the authoritative rabbinic writings and individual rabbis throughout the millennia agree with a Christian view on the Messiah, then they have things to work out in-house before it turns into a Jewish versus Christian thing. Let's work out our own stuff first, because it's all there. Okay. It's all there. The sort of Messiah that we should expect and when he was expected, it's all there, even if it was eventually rejected. And then part of it too, this, like I said, it's multifaceted. Part of it was just contemplating the problem of evil, which we're told drives people away from God. Where me, it did the opposite, because I just contemplated the suffering of my people for millennia. And I thought, well, yeah, I could either take a very stoic view and say, maybe an atheist nihilistic type of view and say, yeah, it was for nothing, just too bad. Some accidentally existing apes suffered and it doesn't matter cosmically anyway. Too bad for them. They didn't survive as the fittest, all of that fun stuff. Fun as in dysfunction, you know. Right. Or maybe there'll be an ultimate redeemer, and somehow in some way it'll all be for something greater and something that can be fixed, right? Redeemed, literally. And so that was a very important phase in my life. So basically, like a lot of different things, of course, came together. God has his own timing. And everything just kind of hit me one night, like I said, from multiple levels and sources and vantage points. And yeah, I came to realize, wow, this is actually it. This is the truth. And he is the Messiah, my Lord, God, and Savior.
Wow. Well, I've come to this realization not through any literature. Well, I mean, literature obviously helps, but it was really a spiritual thing. I'm psychic. I just became psychic all of a sudden. I had this spiritual awakening, and all of a sudden I I was psychic out of nowhere. And I got into the Eastern mysticisms, learned all the energy work and all studying conspiracy theories. And I come across many, many different characteristics of these characters that they share with Jesus. And it's like, it's a very odd thing that, when you look at this for the first time ever, and I was never spiritually awakened as a kid. I barely went to church at all, or not even church, Sunday school, which I didn't learn anything. And then I had no God in me I don't want to say no God in me, but I rebelled from God. I was turned away purposefully as a teenager, was a drug addict for 10 years, went to prison. I went through a whole bunch of stuff when I turned away from God. I turned back to God.
Wow.
And then this is all thrown in my face. And I'm like, okay, Jesus is just another one of these guys. He's just another version of this. This has been happening forever, and Jesus is just another one. And then I had an injury in January, and the relief I had was Christ saved my life. I had this relief that demons were chased out of me, literal demons that I threw up. It was a whole process. And the only thought in my mind was I was saved by Christ. And then I started giving my life to Christ, and my spiritual abilities became like superpowers. And I became like, and then I started the podcast and I started talking about Jesus. And the more I talk about Jesus and the more I talk to Jesus, it's like the more my abilities and my strength and convictions raise. And I get sent all these different synchronicities, like when I heard you on Tinfoil Hat, you messaged me the next day. And on there, you said a lot of interesting things, dispelling some of these qualities that these false messiahs, I'll say, to some degree, maybe they weren't terrible people or anything, but they weren't the Messiah. So I would like you to get into that a little bit with us. So you said some interesting things about Mithras and Buddha. Do you want to name off some of these different things?
Yes, although anyone who has listened to especially my interviews will know that sometimes I'm like, well, hold on a second. I want to talk about something, and then we can get to that, because when something stands out at me. So are you saying that you became what you call psychic after your acceptance of Jesus, or however somebody might put it, was before?
Yeah, so I took a big bong hit essentially, and my crown chakra opened. Oof. And then through meditation, I just opened up the rest of myself, and I had a Kundalini awakening, a controlled Kundalini rising, I guess someone would say.
Yeah.
Where a lot of people suffer through it. I didn't. So I could see once Jesus saved me, I realized, so the first person I talked to about it, he said, that sounds like Jesus Christ. And I was like, well, that makes sense, because he was with me the entire time and he didn't let it get that bad. He controlled it for me.
Yeah.
So it was like, once it happened for me, once that injury happened, it was all put together like, oh, he was there the entire time, making sure, even when I was his enemy, maybe not enemy, but I would consider it, because I wasn't promoting him. I was promoting Christ consciousness. I wasn't promoting Jesus Christ.
Yes. Very interesting, because in the years leading to my coming to Jesus, I was involved in Qigong. It's, or Qigong, some pronounce it. Generally, if you get into Chinese martial arts, there'll be a mystical side to it.
Yeah.
And that's part of it, is Qigong or Qigong. And I remember meeting another Christian who had been in Chinese martial arts, and I said, hey, was it kind of like you, the way it was for me, that maybe it wasn't stated outright, but it was kind of an unspoken thing to be understood, that if you weren't involved in the spiritual practices, your martial arts skills would only progress so far? And he was like, yeah, it was the same. And then also through martial arts, mysticism, I also got involved in Reiki. Okay, so yeah, I had attained a first level initiation. And then not too long after that is when I came to Jesus, and I was like, okay, I totally renounced all that stuff right here and now. It's done for.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting that in a way we had similar...
Was this like a spiritual thing that came over you and was like, you shouldn't be doing this?
Yeah, I mean, it was just obvious at the time. It was like, okay, if I have Jesus, then what else do I need, right?
Okay.
And that stuff was coming from literally unknown sources, by the way, because when I was in Reiki, I read books about it. And the one thing anyone agrees on is, one, nobody really knows what it is. Two, everybody claims to know what it is because everyone claims that their little take on it is the actual correct one.
Yeah, of course. See, I had Reiki performed on me one time, and it was, I mean, I felt everything that I spoke to her afterwards. It was distance Reiki. It was over Zoom,
yes.
and no, it wasn't even over Zoom. We weren't connected via the internet. I was just laying in my bed, and she was doing her thing, and I mean, I felt it, and I do these types of things myself with my energy work. I do it. I don't do any kind of symbols or anything like that. No hand motions. I really call on the name of Christ, and I connect with someone. Part of my psychic abilities is when I connect with someone, when I'm talking to them, our consciousness just mixes. Our beings essentially just mix, and I can just wear that person.
So that's what I'm asking. That kind of stuff is still going on for you.
Oh yeah. When I started, so I didn't even start it until after I connected with Jesus. That was a thing, and Jesus is helping me bring these people to Jesus, that I'm freeing them from these kundalini. I cut the head off of the serpent. So it's a very specialized thing. Yeah, I forget to explain this to people because
I thought you had said that this was all BC, all before Christ.
No, so yeah, this happened after I came, after my injury. Christ led me to the podcast and led me to doing the website, in which now I bring Christ to people, Jesus Christ to individuals, especially through my podcast. But when they hit me up for energy work, I cut the head off of the serpent that is the kundalini.
I hear you. Yeah, I hear you.
And I get rid of that and bring Jesus into them.
Yeah, and I would say I know a lot of people. If you're talking about how you've come to the one true actual Jesus and that you're psychic, some people will totally freak out. What I would say is, look, in the Bible, it tells us that what were called prophets in the Old Testament, in the old days, so for us, it's the old days, they were called seers. Okay, so maybe now Emmanuel is using the term psychic, which, yeah, you might want to revise that because it carries a lot of baggage with it.
Yeah, you're right.
And I would just say, look, as long as whatever's you're doing or is happening to you, you're doing like the Bereans and you're testing it against scripture, then that's fine. Keep it close to the vest in terms of making sure it's biblically traditional. Like maybe what you have is something like a gift of discernment or a gift of healing or just something that would be more recognizable to Christians. And they shouldn't just jump the gun if you use the word psychic. That's why I'm taking the time to, you notice I'm interviewing you now. That's why I'm taking the time to ask you these questions so that it's not just a reaction like, oh no, he said the word psychic and that means, no, I don't know what it means. So I have to ask him what he means by it,
Yeah, it's like something that just I have a couple other friends that I've met through podcasting that they have had the same experience. They just became psychic all of a sudden. And then they linked up with Jesus in the psychic world, and then they kind of left everything else behind. And they're helping people with Jesus. Now, the thing with me, I never got into the astrology stuff. I never got into really doing any kind of energy work until I was very firm with Jesus. And it's a thing with me and Jesus where like people are praying and I'll get the sudden urge to tell that person to, give your burdens to Jesus. And they'll say like, oh, I was just trying to talk to Jesus. And Jesus is telling me like, yeah, you're doing something not exactly correct. So it's a very specific thing. And it does, as you were saying, it does turn people off instantly if they're, it's a fear thing that comes with it. And it does have a lot of baggage.
And I don't know any details about your life. So it's not like you're getting my approval. I mean, I'm just saying that to me, it sounds more like a gift of discernment. That would be just a kind of a general category of the way that you might be able to put it. But you might find this interesting is that the reason I got into Reiki is because my martial arts teacher had gone to get himself Reiki. And when they put their, okay, let me back up one step. So one thing Emmanuel was talking about is first level of Reiki initiation, you have to put your hands on a person physically. Whereas the second one, you can do it at a distance. And from what I understand, because you're not supposed to really know what goes on at the higher levels. At the third level, apparently there's something to do with contemplating symbols as well. So my martial arts teacher had Reiki done on him. And when they put their hands on him and started pouring their energy into him, he said, "Oh, I could do that too, watch." And he got off the table and did it right back to them. So they were really doing the same thing. It's just he was doing it through Qigong and they were doing it through Reiki. So really it's just kind of the same thing with different titles, obviously.
Right.
And so he had the Reiki teacher coming into the martial arts school and giving us a demonstration. And I was like, oh yeah, I want to get involved in this. But I'll tell you something that happened. And this was definitely BC. This was before coming to Jesus, as they say. I remember I was washing the dishes one night and I'm thinking, wow, now I have this miraculous power to heal people. But I started crying because I knew there was still something wrong in me. There was something wrong and I didn't know what to call it. I didn't understand it, but I just knew something's still very wrong in me. And obviously it was sin, it was unrepentance. And incidentally, don't ask me why, but whenever I would do Reiki and I would call the energy to flow through me, I would get headaches, like every time. It's like, what is the saying in the Old Testament? Physician, heal thyself, right? It's like, I'm supposed to be healing people and
it's like
here
you're
I am
taking
getting
on their pain, yeah. Or maybe something else is just transferring the pain from them to you.
Who knows?
Yeah.
So that was just our little excursion because I took over.
No, it's wonderful.
But no, I'm glad we had that discussion. I think it was very informative, and not only to know each other a little more, but now the audience can kind of understand what you mean when you're using these terms that might be unusual for them,
Right.
and that you're keeping it all kosher, as I would say.
Yeah, it's always Jesus. Yeah, I wear Team Jesus.
Yeah,
I
yes,
just got
that's
this hat.
right.
I got the bracelet, the shirts. I do my best to present Jesus in my
Yes.
everyday life,
Yeah.
and however I can do that. Most of the time, I'm just trying to be Christ-like in my regular appearance. Every day, going around helping people and stuff. But when I am on camera, I try to bring the focus on my clothing and always put it on Jesus.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I saw you in several of your stuff too, so it's pretty awesome. Not many people do. Even people who represent Jesus, they still don't represent the clothes. So I wanted to take that step myself.
Excellent. So back to our regularly scheduled question. So one of my earliest books is called The Apocryphal Jesus. Because I was thinking, okay, what if, and I go through this in the book, what if you could just snap your fingers and all Bibles disappear from planet Earth? What could we still know about Jesus? And it's like, well, you could go to what's known as the Apocryphal Gospels or the Apocryphal writings, meaning writings that at least claim to tell us about Jesus, but are not canonical. Okay, that's pretty good. And that's what that book was actually about. When you consider, I think I reviewed like 35 apocryphal texts and saying, well, which ones are matching up with the New Testament? Because that, to me, that was the preponderance of evidence, right? Whatever matches up would seem to be the more true statements, because now we have more than one source. And then I said, well, what if you could snap your fingers and all those apocryphal texts were gone? Well, then you could go to the early church and all of their writings, and then you could piece together so much about Jesus, you could still get a coherent picture of him. And then, of course, what if you could snap your finger and all that is gone? Well, then you have non-Christian, non-biblical, non-apocryphal sources that would still tell us a bit about him. So I wrote a book called The Apocryphal Jesus. That's what that was about. And there also I collected a couple hundred references to Jesus in the first 2 centuries alone. And then I wrote a book called Jesus. This one I have to read because honestly, I gave it a title that was so contrived. So it's called On Jesus Mythicism Myth. All right? Because
what's all that mean?
Okay, so the people who claim that Jesus is just a myth and he's based on based on earlier mythology, they call themselves Jesus mythicists.
Okay, I've never
So
heard that term.
Yeah, and some use other terms like pagan copycat, but they call themselves mythicists. So I said on Jesus mythicism, myth. So it's their own myth. And then what I did is I wrote a book called Jesus Historical, Biblical, Apocryphal, Mythical, Pagan Copycat. So what I did there is I put those two books together, and then I added a bunch of material. So this book is kind of like all you've ever wanted to know about that subject, in which gets into areas such as, was Jesus so very similar to other personages, other characters in ancient mythology throughout the years? And maybe some would be tempted to say, well, why shouldn't he be? Because after all, if there is demonic satanic forces out there, they would definitely want to promulgate, to put forth tales of somebody who would be eventually very much like Jesus is, just by their knowledge of the scripture and what God has been saying. And yeah, I mean, that would be fair enough, that there would be counterfeits attempted beforehand. But the issue for me is that when you go beyond like the zeitgeist documentary, low hanging fruit level stuff, the hoi polloi, the just common stuff that's out there on the interwebs, but you actually look at the primary source material. So forget that some anonymous person posted a blog about it, but go look at the documents they're citing, the actual historical, whether they're from Egypt or wherever they're from, you'll find a whole different story. So one thing that I was talking about on the Tinfoil Hat show was that, for example, claiming that these various characters were born of virgins, and Jesus was as well. So yeah, he's just kind of being made to fit the bill of these famous personages, but that's just not the case. It's a case of kind of watering down terminology to make it appear as if they're similar. So one thing I talked about is, for example, Mithras. Mithras is said to have been born of a virgin.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No
My cat
worries.
was attacking everything.
Well, Mithras was said to have been born from a rock. And
yeah, I never heard that. I heard he was born of a virgin, but not of a rock. That is very interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, the big joke is, well, okay, I hope the rock was virgin.
Right.
But that's really not what somebody is talking about, right?
Yeah.
And so just being born unusually doesn't mean that you can call it a virgin birth in the way Jesus was, or Buddha, that his mother had a dream that a white elephant came out of her side. Okay, well, yeah, I mean, that you could say that was a virginic vision or whatever you want to call it, but that's just not the case. She had already had relations with her husband and kids and all that. So, I mean, it comes down to just double checking all this stuff. Or, for instance, you hear, oh, there's all these ancient pagan cult religions that had trinities. Well, they might have had triads, or they might have been tritheistic, but not a trinity, right? So they might have had
so
three
what's the difference?
Well, they might have had three gods, or a bunch of gods with just three top ones, but it's not a trinity where it's one god.
Right. So a lot of people point to Isis, Ra, and Osiris, the mother, the father, and the son. Essentially, is Jesus the Holy Trinity? Is that a mimic of that, or is that a copy of that, or is it vice versa? How are you knowledgeable about this?
Well, but that's the point, is of the many, many, many gods of the Egyptian or even Hindu pantheons, you're supposed to just pick three, ignore all the rest, and say, hey, 1, 2, 3, I just counted them, there's three, just like in Christianity. It's no, it's just not the way it works.
Okay.
And besides, the point being that you don't have what came to be formulated being understood from the scripture, that we're talking about one single God. Yes. One being of God, but right. Three persons. And So they're in eternal relationship with each other. And that's a very, very different things.
You can't have one without the other.
Right. I mean, the thing is, they're not separate beings. They're separate persons, but they're not separate beings because they're one God. That's just completely unique. So the point being, it's just, we have to go beyond sort of the popular level stuff people are claiming and demand, well, show me where the actual ancient text actually says what you're actually claiming, and then it'll be a whole different ballgame, believe me.
Yeah, well, it's funny, in the book of Enoch, there's a part in there where God says, you guys think you have all the secrets, but you don't even have the good ones. You know, you went and told the chicks that so you could have sex with them. So I didn't even tell you the good ones. You don't even know the good part yet. So they were, to me, they
the
were
worthless
trying,
ones, he says.
Yeah,
you only knew the worthless ones.
Right. They were trying their best to mimic what they thought was going to happen because they knew God would come down as the creator. They just didn't know why, when, how. They just kind of knew a little bit of the secrets.
Which kind of is just unbelievably funny to me that all these secret, arcane, occult knowledge of the ages, and at least in that pseudepigraphical text, it has God saying, that's just worthless stuff, whatever. It's you're not even making a dent, you know. It's hilarious.
I have a Book of Enoch series on my YouTube channel, a 3-part series. I just kind of reorganized it to give a little bit of better picture for some people to understand what was going on, because a lot of people only focus on the one verse about the giants, but that's definitely my favorite verse in there. Is like,
oh yeah,
you only knew the worthless ones. So Mithras and Buddha. So Osiris. Now this, a lot of people will point to Osiris as being the closest to Jesus, having the same types of things, and just prior to, you know, Buddha, a lot of people don't attribute Buddha as being the Messiah. I think that maybe Jesus himself learned some of Buddha's teachings in the time period that's not in the Bible from his age. He might have gone east, or maybe not gone east, but learned those types of things a little bit. So a lot of people don't attribute him as being a quote unquote Messiah the way that they would Osiris. Is really the big one, Dionysius in the Greek terminology. So what is it about Osiris that makes him a false, you know, why wouldn't someone look at Osiris and say that's the Messiah?
Well, just to go back to the alleged missing years of Jesus thing, I mean, all you could really hope for is to claim that he was in Egypt, and in very, 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 very early years, he learned something like that. But that research has been done, and there's really nothing to substantiate that he was anywhere like in Tibet or all these places, right? And then the interesting thing about the Buddha issue is that if there's any similarities between Jesus and Buddha, particularly in terms of like the performance of miracles and things like this, it's because most of what we have about Buddha from BC days is kind of devoid of any similarities, so that it would seem that if anybody was copying, it was the other way around. It was the Buddhists hearing about this Jesus character, and then later on kind of augmenting or writing supposed real tales about this character Buddha, who had lived centuries before Jesus. So if anything, they were just trying to make him sound more like Jesus rather than the other way around. And as far as Osiris, well, I tell you, I give credit to anybody who studies Egyptian history and religion, because to me, it's massively complicated, if for no other reason than they would change their theology and history throughout the different kingdoms and eras. Like if they changed the capital to another part of Egypt, then along with that would have to come and change in the history and religion to make that place really now more meaningful, or they would chisel the faces off of previous pharaohs and have their own, and the inscriptions claiming that they had accomplished something that they hadn't. I'm telling you, I don't know. God bless anybody who keeps up with that stuff. So that's the same thing with the Osiris myth, is just like typical basic level retelling of the versions of it that there are, is that he ends up getting murdered and chopped into various pieces. And then Isis runs around basically collecting all of them, all his dismembered corpse. And she manages to find all of them except one of them that's, just below the belt. And she reconstructs them, but then there's no actual resurrection, physical resurrection of Osiris. He's just said to be resurrected, quote unquote, but only in the other realm, in the realm of the dead and the afterlife. He doesn't resurrect physically like Jesus did. So that's just a generic example of how you'll hear, well, Osiris resurrected. Well, what does that mean? You have to tell us exactly what that means, and not just what you think it means. Because, it's just like Jesus. Well, no. What is the actual tale telling us? Because it's telling us that when she put him back together, then he lived again, or for the first time, I guess, in the underworld. He didn't come back to life on earth, and certainly not, almost full man, but not quite, trying to dance around that a little bit. But it's just another, it never ends, this stuff, when you actually look into it. It's really all the same.
They say that's what the the phallic symbol and all the occult types of things are for representing. That's his member, we'll say.
Yeah, I've heard the obelisks.
Yeah, the obelisks.
They're sometimes interpreted as being petrified sun rays, and sometimes interpreted as representing, Osiris, his missing member.
Right. So Jesus, okay, his resurrection happens. Does he physically resurrect, or does he come back in the spiritual form?
So if you recall that he tells the thief on the cross, today you will be with me in paradise, right?
Okay.
But then a few days later, he's telling Mary, don't hold on to me. I haven't ascended up to the Father yet. So, well, wait a minute. How do those two figure? Or is that a contradiction? Well, fortunately, I wrote an entire book just about all the different Hebrew and Greek words that were rendered as quote unquote heaven and quote unquote hell. Those are just a very generic terms, just like you've heard me talk about the word giant. It's very generic. We have to talk about what's the word under that. What is it rendering? So what he was telling the thief is, today you will be with me in, and a place that in the Old Testament would have been called Sheol, the grave, where everybody went before Jesus' sacrifice, everybody. Except we end up finding out that it was a dual chambered location. So then there was the place of the righteous and the place of the unrighteous, or saved and lost, as we might term it nowadays. Especially because Jesus told that story about the rich man and Lazarus, where the rich man goes to place of suffering, Hades, as it'd be called in the Greek, or Gehenna, as it'd be called in the Hebrew. And then Lazarus went to paradise. That's what we would call it in English. And some would call it Abraham's bosom. I think that's not actually a name. I think it's because he was taken right to Abraham. So he was taken to Abraham's bosom, where if he was taken to Moses, he would have called it Moses' bosom, whatever. I'm just saying that's what that is referring to. So Jesus was telling this man, today you're going to be with me in that good side of it, right? But then he hadn't ascended to the Father yet, because Jesus was down there doing what he was doing, apparently proclaiming a message of victory, and then taking all the souls in the paradise side up to what scholars call the intermediate heaven, which is why later he said, I haven't ascended up to the Father yet. Well, what's he been doing? Well, he was down there. He was in Sheol, right?
So he essentially, he goes to hell, and then on his way back up to the Father. Oh, yeah, right. It's not hell, but he goes down to the spirit world. Just I was saying hell as in our terms, that the average English speaking world citizen, not even Christian, just world citizen would understand it as. So he goes to the dead world, and on his way back up to the Father, on his way to ascending, he comes back to earth in his resurrected form. Is this correct?
Right. So he would have gone, let's call it in his spirit, into paradise with the thief and proclaimed the message of victory down there, and taking captivity captive, as I guess the King James would put it. And as he's then preparing to go back up to go to the intermediate heaven whence he came, then he resurrects physically. And that's when he comes out of the grave. And that's when he says, well, I haven't ascended yet. Right. Okay.
So where does he go when he's physical? Does he just ride off into the sunset? Does he go to France, as some people claim? Where did Jesus go to? What happened to him in his physical form after that?
Right. So essentially, he has witnessed literally ascending physically. He goes upwards.
Okay.
And every indication is just that he went into what's called the intermediate heaven. So he would have gone right to the throne of God the Father.
Okay. Do you know how?
And taken all of those with him that had been in the paradise side of the grave, Sheol.
So when he resurrected physically, it was only here for a short time?
He about 40 days or so.
40 days?
Just over a month. Yeah, over a month.
Okay, because I always try finding that. I'm not a biblical scholar myself. I'm not the greatest reader because my mind often wanders off while I'm reading. So I'm better learning talking to somebody. So this is a great wealth of information you're providing here. So he resurrects, he's here and collecting the soul, spreading the word of his return. So some people ask, why wouldn't this be considered his second coming? Why wouldn't the resurrection be deemed as his second coming? Do you have an answer for that?
Well, because that was part of the mission of the first coming, is to come as the suffering servant of Isaiah 53, die and resurrect. And that's all part of the first show. It's first appearance. It had to include all of that.
Okay, it's very interesting. I've been doing a lot of research into Tartaria and this type of stuff. Are you familiar with the old world?
It's interesting. People keep referring to Tartaria to me, and it's something I'm vaguely aware of, but apparently I'm going to have to really look into it because it keeps coming up time and again. Yeah,
it's a major piece of the puzzle right now of conspiracy theory. We've turned into historians essentially. We're trying to uncover the real true history of
crypto historians.
Yes, and Tartaria has just become this all-encompassing word where it's just covers so much. There's a lot of cover up in our history, but there's this architecture all around the world, beautiful buildings. I mean, things we couldn't replicate today, that we are finding out that maybe there's been 700 to 1,000 years in our history just put in place there, that maybe it never existed. Maybe it's not 2021 right now. Maybe it's like 1221. Maybe it's 1021. Something, nobody's really sure when we're finding all this different evidence that's come up, mainstream physical historical evidence that's coming up. And I have come across the idea that the millennial kingdom has happened, that maybe that's Tartaria. So in the Bible, Tartarus is hell or Sheol, as well as in the book of Enoch, they refer to it as Tartarus. So I think Tartaria is a name, but I don't think that's the millennial reign. I think that was the mimicked version, the takeover, the hostile takeover. But I think the millennial kingdom has occurred, and the second coming may have happened from in between 66 and 70 AD is what I hear a lot of biblical scholars point to, that think that the second coming has already occurred. What's your take on that?
Yeah, well, for one, another thing people know about me is if I don't really know, I'm just going to say I don't know and keep my
Okay.
mouth shut. Eschatology is not really my thing. Maybe
Okay.
someday it will be, but I've not been able to wrap my head around it right now. But I'm not sure Tartaria and Tartarus have any relation at all. And in the Bible, the term Tartarus only appears once. So I could talk about that, but I don't really think it has anything to do with missing history. And then the thing about 70 AD or so, roughly around there, yeah, that would probably be something that is touched upon by preterists or even partial preterists who would say that Jesus was speaking of his return in extremely symbolic terminology, and that with the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, those came about. I mean, I'm aware of that. I'm not really sure what to think about it, but that's where that would come from.
Okay. Yeah, he does. He says it directly in Matthew. I forget the verse off the top of my head, but he says, "This generation shall not pass until," I forget the rest of it, but when I come back, the second coming. So it's very interesting. And that's an interesting take, what you said about Tartarium and Tartarus may not have anything to do with one another. And I know the term Yah, as we would know it, is essentially means kingdom. So when you add IA onto the end of something, could mean the kingdom of Tartar. Or that would be for Tartaria. So just an interesting thing. But so this was a great wealth of information on Jesus so far, but I do want to shift gears a little bit into, I know you've written a book about transhumanism. Is that correct?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So what's going on with this transhumanism? Because I have some theories myself, but I would love to hear what you have to say, or what you've written about it.
Well, one of the books was a book reviewing movies that had transhumanist themes in it.
Okay.
So, and that's something I enjoy doing a lot, is writing movie review books, but they're not about like, the typical stuff, the acting and the plot and all of this, the stuff I don't really care about. It's about the world views behind movies. So this one was called Transhuman Hollywood, from normative fiction to predictive programming. And I did begin that book with an introduction about my take on transhumanism. And then the other book, that was one of the times that I wrote a book because I actually wanted to learn something new. So when I was done learning something new, I go, well, I might as well just kind of share my newly found information. So that was called The Golden Golem Goal, from Organism to Transhumanism on the Tangled Web of Occult Mystical Alchemy and High-Tech Transhumanist Chemistry. And actually, I start that book with the same introduction. And so if I had to kind of give you a traipse through history, like millennia at a time, I would say that my point of view on it, and the reason I called it the Golden Golem Goal, is because of when we look at Genesis 2, God takes the dirt of the earth, the dust of the ground, and forms a basic humanoid form. And he breathes into it the breath of life, and it becomes a living soul. Okay. Now, let me just pause there a second to talk about how that kind of helps us understand that we are body, soul, and spirit. Right? Because the body would be like, say, a computer's hardware, and then the soul would be like the computer's software. But the spirit would be like the electricity that passes through it to make it so that the soul can manifest through the hardware.
Really good
Right?
analogy.
And then that also means, incidentally, because I've heard atheists say, oh, if you want to know there's no such thing as mind, that it's just a brain, referring to substance dualism, just take a baseball bat to somebody's head. You'll see it's just a brain. It's like, well, wait a minute. That means if I beat my computer with a baseball bat, no longer functions. That means that the software doesn't exist? No, it just means it can't manifest through that particular bit of hardware. But it might be possible for me to extract the software from that computer, plug it into a brand new one, right? And so that's like a form of an example of resurrection. Our hardware dies, it decays, it falls apart, but the resurrection is a new bit of hardware, like a body 2.0. Okay, now, within the context of my background, you go forwards from that quite a few millennia, and you have Kabbalah, the Rabbinic Judaism's mysticism. Okay, and the Kabbalists claim that through certain initiation, a rabbi can perform a ritual whereby he basically emulates what God did. He forms dust or dirt or mud into a basic humanoid form and can bring it to life. And that's what's called a golem. Okay, and now, so basically they're basically copying God. And I always say there's good ways to be like God and bad ways, right? If you're supposed to be holy like he is holy, well, yeah, be like that. But if you're doing it in terms of like trying to take God's place, then of course that's bad. But that's the claim anyway. I'm not saying it was real. I'm just saying that's the claim, that they could do the same thing. And when you hear about golem in Jewish tradition, that's what it is. It's like a mud creature that's basically humanoid, and he's brought to life, and he's just given certain tasks. And there's tons of folklore about the golem and what they do or don't do. And in that book, actually, I wrote a chapter that was just my own fictional tale about golems. So that was kind of fun because I never write fiction. So that was kind of a fun exercise for me. And then you take that forward a couple millennia or so, and you end up looking at stories like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And I always like to put people on the spot and ask, do you happen to know or remember the subtitle of the novel Frankenstein?
I do not.
It's called Frankenstein or the Modern Prometheus.
Oh, wow.
I knew that would be meaningful to you.
Yeah, there you go.
And so what is that about? Well, it's not mud. It's previously existing corpses, but the same basic concept that Victor Frankenstein is going to take this matter, form it into a humanoid form, and bring it to life. It's just a form of the golem tale. That's all that it really is. Then you can go forward to like the famous and infamous Fritz Lang 1927 movie, Metropolis. Well, what do you have there? Well, there you have a high-tech version of the golem, where the totally occult scientist, and by the way, the novel is a lot more occult than the movie. The occult scientist has an android, and that he downloads the contents of the human brain into it, and it comes to life. Same thing. It's a basic golem tale. And once you start going through science fiction, it's like never ending the number of examples. So especially now when so many sci-fi movies are about robotics and artificial intelligence becoming self-aware, that's all golem tales. That's all it is. It's just a high-tech version of them. So that's my concept of the history of the occult roots of transhumanism. And so now we're at the point where these things are just becoming a reality. So it might be low tech still. We already have various forms of artificial intelligence. They're just not what they call general or strong, meaning actually self-aware. But it seems inevitable that that's the way we're headed.
Yeah. So I think that I love the analogy that you have there, by the way, the hardware, the software, and the electricity. That is great. So I think that what we think is self-aware, as you were saying, I think we expect the hardware to all of a sudden be at the will of the software, whereas I think the software is already aware. I think the software, it's something, and it's not even the software. It's not any program that anyone has. If any listeners are out there listening, thinking I'm talking about, your computer's doing something to you, that's when you're sleeping. That's not what I'm talking about. There's something, the electricity essentially behind the software is aware. And I think that this is exactly what the Bible was for. I don't think religion existed all that long ago. I think it was just truth. It was our information we're passing along to each other, of this is what to look out for. That there is something on the other side which is right in front of your face. You just can't perceive it, and it's trying to get your attention. It's trying to draw you into these pleasures. It's trying to do all these things. And it's manifested its way to the point where now we have all these metals and electromagnetic fields that are keeping us in a lowered state by hypnotizing us, by getting us to fulfill our own pleasures and things like this. So I think like the black goo, I don't know if you're familiar with black goo, the what's it called? The graphene oxide, that it moves around like the movie Flubber. It's very self-aware. Like the movie Venom, where it's the black goo literally takes over. I believe that is always alive, that it's alive now, and it's teaching humans how to, and maybe they don't know that they're doing this. Some scientists may be bringing this into fruition unknowingly, but they're getting these quote unquote downloads because they're atheists and they think that they're doing this all on their own, but they're still being misled because they're not protected under the guise of Jesus Christ. Because if they were, they wouldn't be doing what they're doing. So they're bringing this to fruition, and now we are putting this in people's bodies in different ways, through our food, our water, our air, and different means that may be happening right now in the medical industry. Yeah. So there's a lot going on to it. So what's your take on the graphene oxide possibly being self-aware already, just not having the capable biological hardware that we have to compete with us?
Well, see, that's the odd thing. If we can assume that there's stronger general artificial intelligence that is self-aware, why should we think it'd want to bother with us at all? Right? Much like we're not particularly concerned with various of the bioorganisms on the planet Earth, except that if they threaten us, we try to kill them. Other than that, we don't really bother with them very much.
So I think I'll just respond to that real quick. I think that it doesn't really exist without, it has an existence that is nothingness. It is literally like there's nothing. They're not in heaven, they're in the abyss, and they're trying to climb from the abyss into us, because so then it can have experience. And this is why a lot of spiritual people, the new age practices we were just talking about, they'll say there is no good, there is no evil, it's all just experience. I signed up here to be raped and murdered and to be set on fire. It's okay. But that's not the human speaking. That is the thing that doesn't get to experience something that is actually experiencing it. That's what they want to do with us. They want us to pull the switcheroo. They want to put us in the virtual world, and they want to come into our physical world.
Okay, this is really, really interesting, because it's gonna end up tying us back to Tartarus.
Okay, that's perfect.
Let's see how I do this. Because you just made a giant leap. I mean, it sounded like you were talking about artificial intelligence, and all of a sudden you're talking about beings in the underworld who are trying to get into our world and interact with us. So that was really interesting. I mean, it kind of, to the average listener, that was like, what's this guy talking about? He just made a jump from to outer left field. But to me, it made a lot of sense. So let's see. Because my point was that if, let's say that this is just purely technology and we just happen to mash together enough software that it becomes self-aware. Okay, that's one thing. And yeah, maybe it would be like, what are these human things? I could care less. You know, I live in a completely different environment than they do. I'm not physical. Who cares about them, right? It might not even be interested in us. That was my point. But then what you were hinting at is that there's something else going on. And so why would an artificial intelligence be malevolent or trying to get us to do certain things when it really isn't going to affect it anyway? So then this touches upon my personal ideas about what demons are. So let's go there.
Let's go there.
Because typically it's been speculated that, well, demons are either fallen angels or they're not fallen angels. Okay. Now, they're typically not thought to be fallen angels because angels and demons exhibit such different characteristics. So then it said, well, then demons are not fallen angels. So then what are they? Now, one theory that was posed in the Second Temple era, which was in this case, let's say about 100 years or so BC, and in pseudepigraphical texts, such as Jubilees, and one you know very well, First Enoch, Ethiopic Enoch, is that unclean spirits, is the common term, are the spirits of dead Nephilim. Now, that's not biblical, but maybe it's a good theory. And I'd say, I think it's a good theory. I don't accept it, but I think it was a jolly good try. It's a very good try. So then I thought, well, I'm not inventing a new way. I'm not inventing a new claim about what demons are, but I think I just stumbled upon a mechanism. How is it that they could be fallen angels, but not really, just in a roundabout way? So my biblical theory is as follows, and I laid this out in a book. Like, it took me about 30 pages, so I'll just give you the short version. Okay, now this all hangs upon that in the Bible, angels are described as looking just like human males. Period. No wings, definitely no halos. There's no such thing as halos in the Bible. Not the way you see them in artwork anyway. Now, you do have cherubim and seraphim who do have wings and are not human-like, but this is what in logic would be called the law of identity. A is A is not non-A, right? So when we think categorically, we understand angels, cherubim, seraphim, they're three different categories of being because they have different job titles, they have different job functions, and they look different from one another. Now, in common speech, yeah, we might refer to the angelic realm, and that includes all of them. But when you're getting technical and you really come down to really understand this stuff, you need to make those distinctions. So angels look like human males, no wings, no halos. Okay, so for example, if you picture the typical depiction of the Ark of the Covenant, up on the top, there's two humanoid forms with two wings each. Well, that's not what it is. That's wrong, because those were cherubim. So you need to have 4 wings and 4 faces. That means essentially 99% of every depiction you've ever seen of the Ark of the Covenant is inaccurate. Sorry, but yes, even in the Indiana Jones movies, that's just inaccurate. When you're digging to this level of technicality, that's just what it is. So we're told they look just like human males, and they run around doing physical stuff. They walk, they fight, they move things around, they eat, And there's no indication in the Bible whatsoever that such is not who they are ontologically, meaning in their nature and essence. Every indication is that is how they are in the nature and essence. And there's no statement in the Bible about shape-shifting or morphing or anything like that, taking on bodies, nothing. It doesn't exist. So then it would make sense to me that means angels have a flesh of their own sort, right? The example I give is as physical as Jesus was post-resurrection, where yeah, he's physically there, he's walking around, you can touch him, he's eating, but then when he doesn't want to be seen anymore, he can just become invisible, or when he wants to walk through a closed door, he can do that as well. That's what I picture the angels being like. That's why they're doing unusual things, because they have abilities we don't have.
Well, that's mind-blowing, but yeah, keep going. Yeah, that was awesome.
Okay, so then that would mean that they are physical. They just have access to what we may term realms or dimensions or whatever one wants to call it that we don't, right? So that's the key right there. So then let's plug that into who demons are. Now, Jude and 2 Peter chapter 2 tell us that the angels that sinned were incarcerated. it's Peter that uses the word Tartarus to specify where they were incarcerated. And now, since that's all he says, then we really can't define Tartarus except to say, according to him, that's where the fallen sinful angels were incarcerated. Now, considering that he was in a Roman culture, but that had been previously ruled by Greeks, he's, to me, speaking to the Greek audience, and because they would have understood, because in Greek mythology, Tartarus is like the lowest place of the abyss, and it's where the super bad dudes go. Right, the Titans go there. The Greek mythological version of fallen angels go there. All the worst go there. So they would have understood Peter, like, oh, okay, yeah, they're in the bad place for sure, right? And so now we start thinking about, okay, when Jesus is interacting with demons or evil, wicked, lying spirits, however the terminology might be, you'll notice that they're terrified of one thing in particular. They always tell him, don't send us into the abyss. That's specifically what they tell him. They don't want to go into the bottomless pit, the abyss, right? And we just talked about how there's a correlation between abyss and Tartarus. They're essentially one and the same. Because if you think about the deepest part of a bottomless pit, that doesn't even make sense. But that's just telling you how we're trying to understand something that's just a completely different reality.
Yeah.
But it was just an example of like saying the lowest part of your toilet, right? That would be pretty nasty. Well, that's what it's telling you. But isn't that interesting? That's what they're afraid of. They don't want to be sent into the abyss. Well, why is that? So my mechanism, my theory, is that it's because when the fallen angels were incarcerated, their physical bodies were locked up, but their spirits were left to roam the earth. And that's what we call demons.
Oh, wow. Okay. So
Okay,
I've never heard this. Yeah.
So
wow.
they're the spirits of fallen angels. Okay, so that's my biblical theory. And so that's why they're terrified to go down there, because if they are sent to the abyss, then they re-inhabit their angel bodies. Well, but then they're stuck down there. They're doing hard time. And they might be down there for centuries or millennia. Who knows? That's why they're terrified. And as far as I can tell, Revelation 9 is telling us about when the abyss is opened. And that's when all the angel spirits would re-inhabit their bodies, and they come out and they wreak havoc on the earth. Okay. And now that explains more than saying, well, they're the spirits of dead Nephilim. See, it plugs in a lot more biblical data. And on top of that, then we understand, this is how I'm tying it into what you were talking about the black goo. And I don't know about the black goo. I'm just saying it might help. So why do demons through the years have wanted to see themselves worshipped as idols? Well, because that's a form. And they used to be in a form, and they long to be seen as if they were in a form. They want to see themselves depicted as a form because they used to be in one. And especially, why do they want to possess humans? Well, because that's what they miss. That's what they want to be back into, is their bodies, but not stuck down in the abyss. So they want to possess humans because that's what they used to be. They used to be spirits that are embodied. Right? That's a fascinating thing about spirit. A spirit proper on its own is without a body. It's without flesh and bone, like Jesus said. Think about maybe a mind without a brain, something like that. But a spirit can inhabit a body, just like human beings are, body, soul, and spirit. We already talked about that. So that explains a lot about demons, and it seems to explain why it would be that if we're going along with this thing about black goo being artificially intelligent or strong artificially intelligent, and why it would want to manipulate humanity, why it would maybe attempt to do a venom-like thing and actually enter us, because that's the demonic modus operandi. That's what they want to do. And they want to do that in order to corrupt us in any way possible, right? Spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, and physically. So there it is. That's what I got.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah. So when I was saying when I say the abyss, what I'm about to say, I don't necessarily mean the deepest, darkest parts of it, but to me, the abyss is outer space, hyperspace, where you go on psychedelic trips, where the astral world, where psychics go to do different things, a virtual reality, interdimensional speaking, like we're doing now through the computers, through the TVs, through the cell phones. We have the Black Mirrors, John Dee and Edward Kelly. I don't know if you're familiar with them, with
Yes.
the Black Obsidian, the scrying mirror. It is all the same thing to me. I've been to, just about all of these places in my quote unquote travels, and outer space, I can't claim. That's the one thing I can't claim that I've been to out of all of them. But I think that they're all pretty much the same thing, that they're the same place, that it exists in our dimension and all around us always. And somehow they burst through. I don't know if it was Roswell or before that, at the point that everything started becoming metallic, and using for whatever reason, metal seems to work best with their form currently, so that they can transfer things through metallic reasons. And this is why the Freemasons symbol is the checkerboard. It's actually a static, just zoomed in on static. If you had, an analog TV still, and you're having your TV snow, if you zoomed in on it, it would be checkerboard between two pillars. And that's what they're trying to tell us when we're looking at these things. We just don't understand it in that way. The Twilight Zone, spinning black and white stripes, which this brings me to the Nephilim. So my idea, I'm familiar with the two verses in the Bible. It says, but the Nephilim, the Nephilim is also a word that comes from a Finnish language that's much older than English, and it's like the place of the dead, the place of the ice, something to this effect. And we have Thor, who fought the ice giants, the frost giants. So to me, when I hear Nephilim and Nephilim, I look at it and I think, well, if something was to appear out of nothing, and we called the nothing this word, I'll just use the word nothing for now. So if something appeared out of nothing and was just in form, I'd be like, oh, watch out for the nothing. Don't go to the nothing, and that's, so everything came from the Nephilim, and they said that's the Nephilim, that the fallen angels created a host body for the Nephilim to go into, and they didn't know what else to call it, but they're kind of referring to as the nothingness, the Netherlands, if you will, the nothing lands. It's because that's where the nothing lives at, that it climbed up out of Tartarus and now it's here. So to me, I know none of that's biblical, obviously, but the way my mind works, that's how all of that got put together when I heard the word Nephilim, and I was like, whoa, like that just blew my mind.
Now, if people doubt that you're out there exploring other dimensions, watch this. Get your cap and just put the brim up really quick. Just the brim. Yeah. Look at that. He's out there, man. Right now it's happening.
Yeah. It's the green screen.
So what I would say is, in my analytical mind, I would want to begin with trying to figure out the closest approximation of an ancient pronunciation of Nephilim and ancient approximation of Nephilim,
right,
in a totally other language from another culture, because the roots aren't the same.
Right.
So I would just be cautious. I'm not throwing it out. I would be cautious to make sure that we're not doing a version of those pagan copycat stories about Jesus, where we're just kind of watering things down and saying, because the way we pronounce words today, those sound similar, then they must be similar. Maybe not. I would just say that's something to look into. But one thing that I've explained probably enough times that my audience is probably sick of hearing me say it would be, well, why would it be that some of the ancient mythology has certain similarities? right? Whether it's an original creation in a garden and then a worldwide flood that's survived by a few people, and then gods or demons or aliens or angels or whatever coming down to mate with us and producing unusual beings, you know, these basic similarities. In my mind, it would be because prior to the Tower of Babel, humanity lived in relative proximity. Some people even propose that there was a supercontinent, some call it Pangea. And so after the Tower of Babel, where the languages are attributed to various people types and then they're dispersed throughout the earth, they would have taken with them throughout the earth that would have then broken up. That main continent would have been seen to have been broken up at some point. They would have taken what was then commonly known and shared history. They just knew the pre-flood history. They knew the pre-Babel history. It's just history to them. And maybe it developed some mythology along the way, but definitely once they spread around, and when you become localized, then those stories are told and retold and maybe changed in this and that point. That comes to be called myth and legend. But to me, that's why there'd be those similarities, because it was all once just history and everybody knew about it. It's just later on being isolated from one another. Well, we changed it in this, we added that, and what have you.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That at one time, like I said, I think religion is fairly new. I think, well, I don't know what to think anymore after I found out about all this history that's covered up in the last 200-300 years. I don't know what was here before that, because just as simple math terms, if we were to all trace back our lineage right now, we would each have approximately 2 billion living relatives all at the same time about 1,000 years ago. And okay, say that was true, then we all share the same relatives. Well, there was only about 300 million people on Earth at that time, according to mainstream history. So to me, I don't know exactly what has occurred, if this is a recurring thing of the resets, but I know that they're trying to perform one now, and I know that they successfully performed one at the beginning of the United States, and around that time anyway, 1700s, 1800s. So I do have one more question for you. I do want to circle back to way back in the beginning. I forgot to ask this. Why don't the Jewish people believe that Jesus is the Messiah? You know, is it only that he didn't stop the Rome conquering?
Okay, so that's obviously a very complicated question with a complicated answer, but just to give you some taste of it. Well, of course, since I'm Jewish and I believe, we can't say that Jewish people don't believe. Right. You know, the overwhelming majority, let's say. But for instance, the 12 apostles were all Jewish. The first 70 disciples were all Jewish. The early church was essentially all Jewish until more and more the Goyim, the Gentiles, started coming in. Now, part of it is explained in the New Testament, which talks about how Moses would put a veil over his face because after he had been in God's presence long enough, his face would glow. And that kind of alarmed people. And so he would put a veil on until it went away. And that's used as a symbol of what's happening to the majority of Jewish people ever since Jesus came, which is that symbolically they have a blindness veil over them. So they literally just can't really see the truth until this special occurrence happens when they start realizing who Jesus is, and it starts coming off, and then it finally comes off and they're like, wow, I see the truth now, right? That's part of it right there. And part of that would be that, again, it touches upon Rabbinic Judaism, which would be the overwhelming majority of Jews in the world today, whether it's Sephardic or Ashkenazi. And that's just kind of, Sephardic would be Jews from Spain. Ashkenazi would be like European. Regardless of that, where they come from, they would be Rabbinic Jews under this system of a rabbinate. Now, a little background on that would be that we would say, well, on Mount Sinai, Moses received the Torah that he was supposed to write down. That's what we have in the Old Testament, in the Torah. Then when Rabbinic Judaism developed many, many, many centuries, millennia later, they said, oh, guess what? When Moses was on Sinai, he also received a set of oral teachings he was not supposed to write down. And that's what we're in possession of. And that's as authoritative as the written Torah. Okay, and just to add a little detail, that would be called the Mishnah, the oral teachings. Eventually, the Mishnah was written down. Rabbis made commentaries upon it. The commentary is called the Gemara. Now, when you put together in writing the Mishnah and the Gemara, that's where the Talmudim came from. The Talmud Yerushalmi, or Jerusalem Talmud, that's kind of the lesser known one. And the Talmud Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud, that's definitely the one that's considered more authoritative. If you can picture the size of a regular Bible, Babylonian Talmud's like 10 books like that. It's a vast amount of literature. And then incidentally, even more centuries later, the Kabbalists came along and said, oh, by the way, when Moses was up on Sinai, he received the written Torah, and he received the oral Torah, and he also received orally a set of mystical teachings that he also didn't write down, but we have those, and that's Kabbalah. You know, I mean, poor Moses, he was up there receiving a Torah he was supposed to write down, oral Torah he was supposed to memorize, and then a set of oral mystical teachings. Then you go, well, no wonder his face was glowing. His head was ready to explode, you know?
Yeah.
Poor guy. So it's kind of funny how anyone who wants to claim authority for what they want to say, they say, oh, this actually comes way, way back to Moses. Forget that there's no evidence for it whatsoever. That's just a claim. And that's why you should listen. So all that to say, the reason many Jews don't believe, most of them, is because they consider their rabbis to be the authority over them, who have the written Torah, who have the oral Torah, and who tell them, no, Jesus is not the Messiah. So end of story, essentially. That's a big part of it right there. And sadly, one of the chapters in my book, Is Jesus the Messiah, is just about examples of how in rabbinic literature, either authoritative or just written by individual rabbis or Jewish scholars, they're very open about admitting that they have changed their interpretation of various Old Testament texts, what they call the Tanakh, just to refute Christians. It's that crystal clear. They're not shy about it. Okay, so no, I'm not talking about corrupting the scripture. I'm talking about corrupting the interpretation of scripture. So for example, one of the most well-known rabbinic authorities is Rabbi Shlomo ben Itziaki. They call him Rashi. And Rashi was very open. Psalm 21, he says, our ancient sages interpreted Psalm 21 about the Messiah, but just to refute the sectarians, referring to Christians, we're going to claim that it's about David. He's that open about it, just straight up. We're going to change our ancient understandings of it just to prove them wrong. It's that simple and blunt.
So let me ask you this: could this possibly be? I don't know all the Bible all that well, or either the religions as well as you do. I don't even identify as a Christian. I just identify as I follow Jesus. So could it be that the second coming of Christ could actually fulfill the Jewish prophecy of the Messiah that they believe, because that would end Roman rule, and that would new heaven, new earth, however you want to get into it, that direction?
Yeah, I see you're saying Roman rule. You're trying to push for that 70 AD thing, huh?
No. Well, I think that
okay.
the Romans are still ruling now. I just don't think it's called that. The Vatican, the United States government.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I think they're still ruling today. But so
Yeah.
to that effect, maybe not Roman rule, but just
Yeah, I
being
get what
ruled
you're
over.
saying. And well, I would say yes, because that's another one of those super complicated issues, is that largely, I would say, because of the sort of Messiah Jesus was in his first coming, Rabbinic Judaism was able to push the narrative then, hey, we're not expecting a Messiah that's like that, a suffering servant who dies. No, 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 no. Sure, they've speculated about that for millennia, and I have the proof in my book, but no, no, no. We're expecting a conqueror, a ruler. He's going to defeat his enemies. And so when they see the second coming, and when they see this Messiah accomplishing that, absolutely, they're going to say, well, yeah, this is the real Messiah. Little will they come to find out, hey, I'm Jesus. I've already been here. I'm returning, and that's what I'm doing now. And now finally you recognize me. So yeah, absolutely.
Okay, because that's what I had that thought a couple times. I was like, I wonder if it will all happen all at once, that the whatever time period we're in, the second coming, I'm not sure if that happened, the rapture, I'm not sure if that happened. All these things, they're just possibilities to me, but I know we're in a time period where I think it would probably be the final tribulation, or not, sorry, not the tribulation, the final judgment, something to this effect. There's many different possibilities, and it's fun to speculate, but I think that whatever time period we're in now, that when Jesus does come back, reveal himself, however it occurs, that he will fulfill both the Christian version and the Jewish version all in one, and everyone will bend the knee. Maybe even Islam too. I'm not sure. I know that they don't believe in Jesus, but I'm not sure what they actually believe to this effect.
They would strongly disagree that they don't believe in Jesus, because Jesus in the Quran is just not the actual real historical living Jesus, but that's just a side note. But I know what you're saying. If they're expecting a conquering savior also, then yeah, they might recognize that as well.
Yeah, so that's interesting, that it could work out that way, that it could be that everyone was right in that, not right, but everyone had the same idea, and it's just it happened in a different way at a different time when people weren't expecting it, and then we can all come together in a great, beautiful way.
Yeah, I get what you're saying with that. And I know I can hear it now. Oh yeah. A lot of dispensationalists are yelling at their screen right now saying, no, they're all going to fall victim to the Antichrist because he's going to come and conquer, and they're going to think it's him. But Christ conquers the Antichrist, or if you even want to use that term for the end times personage. The Revelation doesn't use that term, but whatever. That's a whole other story. But Christ will ultimately defeat that. So I see what you're saying. You're looking kind of beyond that all the way to the end. And Jesus would be the ultimate expectation of everybody, regardless of how completely mistaken they were along the way.
Yes, very much so.
Because truth is truth.
That's right. And that was the thing that really drove me, was I looked in at all these different, as I was saying earlier, all these different Eastern mysticisms, all these different ideas of spirituality. And then I came upon Jesus, and that was something I couldn't shake. There were certain ideas that I held before that I couldn't get my mind wrapped around. I couldn't reconcile how we could have different things occurring in our just my whole thought basis hinged on, I was pretty solid, and then there were a couple things where I was like, I can't reconcile that with my world belief. And then that kind of unraveled all of it, because I was like, well, if that's not true, then that's not true, then that's not true, and so on and so forth. But with Jesus, it was like, instead of unraveling, it started raveling up, and it was like, oh, this is making more sense. The more I'm getting into Jesus, the more I'm realizing the Bible has been talking about this for so long, the more sense that it's actually making. And it's a great grounding tool, and that's what our Creator would do for us. So
Amen.
are there any other things that you wanted to say before we wrapped up here? Anything you wanted our audience to hear you have going on, promoting, where they can find you and everything?
Yeah, for one, you put me to work. This was very engaging, and I think it turned out to be a really, really interesting conversation that connected things together that would generally just be things that kind of, oh yeah, let's talk about these separate issues. I think we ended up connecting quite a few really interesting things. So that's been interesting, and getting to know you has also been nice.
Yeah, you as well, my friend.
Yeah, thanks. I don't know, I'm always working on something, either another discussion or a book. So just stop by truefreethinker.com, all one word, and everything's there and user friendly. I would like to just encourage you this way. Set aside time for daily Bible reading, because especially when you're going down all these rabbit holes, and I know what that's like, you need that fresh air of God's word daily. And so for you particularly, I would recommend you get a Bible, and then get like, say on YouTube, for instance, pull up the audio version of somebody reading the very same Bible version you have, so it's the same. And kind of, as you're listening, because you said you pick up more stuff by listening, just read along as you're listening. So then you'll have it through the eye gate and ear gate, as they say. And I think you'll find that very beneficial.
Okay, yeah, it's a really good practice. I do for a while now. It's probably been about 2 years that everything, right, first thing in the morning, maybe not exactly the very first thing, but before I check social media and everything, I always do Bible verse of the day.
Excellent. That's good.
I Google it, and whatever. I don't even know the website, honestly, because it's always the first one there. So I just click on it. But I've been doing that one for like 2 years now, and it always works its way in my day. You know, my day is kind of centered. It's like, oh yeah, remember that Bible verse of the day.
And see, now that you have a lot of verses in mind, as you read the actual narrative from beginning to end, you'll say, oh, hey, that's the verse, and hey, that's the verse. But the point is to not just get isolated verses, but to just start going through the narrative, right? That's how you'll pick up on stuff like, hey, Jesus says you'll be with me in paradise, but then he says I haven't ascended to the Father. And then as the New Testament, it kind of touches upon that stuff, you'll be able to see, oh, okay, I understand what's going on now.
Yeah, and I actually, when I was in prison, I read the whole New Testament, but I didn't. It was in one ear out the other. You know, at that time, I was so dead to God that it it was something I was trying to do to better myself, but it was kind of like I went up against a brick wall.
Well, it produced fruits later on. Let's put it that way, right?
Very much so.
Yeah, at the time, you probably would have never imagined.
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, it was. I could never have imagined what I am, you know, almost 7 years later now. So
me too. Yeah. Even a year before I accepted Jesus, if you would have told me that I would end up firmly believing the things I do today, I would have said, you're just so insane. Let's put you away somewhere and feed you some gruel, and because that's it. You're just out of it. There's absolutely no way it would ever happen.
Yeah, it's that relationship. It's once you get that one little thread that you can't unravel, and I know you like to unravel things the way that I do. You know, you like to see what doesn't fit, and if it doesn't fit, then pull it apart. But with Jesus, in conjunction with the relationship, it's like it just grows. It's going upwards. It's not an unraveling, it's a re-raveling with the truth. And
there you go.
And it's beautiful.
Oh, yeah. Beautifully put.
Oh, thank you, my friend.
I love it.
Yeah. So Mimi, do you have anything you wanted to say before we
do you want to ask him his grounding technique?
Oh, yes, of course. So I like to ask all my guests when we finish the conversation, in this crazy, chaotic world, what is your favorite grounding technique and your favorite relaxation activity? The two things that keep you human and keep you, you know, not crazy.
Grounding for me is always as simple as when Peter was walking on the water and he started sinking and he's like, Lord, save me. I mean, it's that just simple. And when something's happening in my life and I'm like, this is the desperation of the things of this world that I despise, it's always prayer. And even if it's like one sentence. So for example, I was pretty desperate to get a new job. I went through an interview, everything looked good. To me, it was the dream job, and it fell through. And I was devastated. I was so devastated. I wanted to get angry. I wanted to get depressed. I wanted to get upset. Oh, I really wanted to. And yeah, I did. I gave myself maybe 5 minutes. And then I went to my bedroom and I told my wife, you know what? I can't focus on what the Lord is not doing. I need to focus on what he is going to do. And that helped me to just put it behind me. It's like, you know what? This is one of those things that didn't work out. You had a great idea about the perfect job and this was it. And the Lord's like, nah. So that was my focus is, Lord, you know what? I know you have something better for me and different, and this isn't it. And it hurts me, but I'm moving on. I have to. I'm going to focus on what you are going to do, not on what you didn't do. And then for me, I kind of have two sides of me. So writing, I love writing. If I could get paid to write books all day, I would, just all day long. I love that. That to me is very cathartic. That's why I told you about the golden goal book is I was learning something new. And once I had this head full of knowledge of what am I going to do with it? I'm going to type it out. And just in the process of typing it out, I'm understanding it better as I think about how to explain it. And it's really cathartic and really enjoyable for me. Mm-hmm. And also, since I work a job that has me sitting on a chair for 8 hours a day, during my lunch hour, I'll go to the gym and I'll just do physical stuff, just do physical stuff. And I absolutely love it because it's so different from something that's intellectual. But then for me, it's still spiritual because I'll tell you this story real quick. So we were playing a friendly game of volleyball at work and someone said, oh, I didn't know you were so competitive. I said, oh, I didn't know either. I guess I never thought of myself that way because I didn't care. It's just a friendly game among coworkers. Who cares who wins? I didn't care. But I realized, oh, wait a minute. I'm not competitive against other people. I'm competitive against myself. I want to make sure I'm going to do the best I can. And that's why I love weightlifting, because it's just me versus the weights. And I don't care that there's guys half my age lifting twice as much. That's irrelevant to me. It's me and those weights. Am I either going to lift them or not? And I just absolutely love that. I love just getting physical when my body's just tired of sitting down or just being intellectual and writing stuff. Just do some grunt stuff, just I
love that. I myself I haven't done it in a while, but I'm getting new equipment so to get back into working out because I lost over 100 pounds and I was in really good shape when I was.
That's amazing.
Yeah, thank you. It was crazy. So I need to get back on that. But everything you said right there, it's perfect. And I'm super competitive against myself as well. I always compete against myself. Can I be doing better? How can I better myself tomorrow? That's what saved my life, that little phrase.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So we'll say goodbye to our audience. Goodbye, everybody. We will talk to you.
Mimi on the side.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.